Okay, good afternoon or even good evening. For some people, good morning. We are glad to welcome you again in our seminar organized by the Korean Studies Center. The Korean Studies Center, I just would like to remind you, is a research center at the School of Social Sciences and Humanities, which conducts research on issues related to Korea and also organizes different events about the Korean history, Korean culture, and other issues related to Korea. So we are glad to welcome you today. And many of the events, as far as I know, of the Korean Studies Center has been about South Korea so far, right? So, but today we'll be talking about North Korea. I think one of these fascinating topics that should be interesting for many of you. Why? Because in Kazakhstan, we don't hear much about North Korea, and we don't have many people, including diplomats, including experts, including, I don't know, tourists going to North Korea and having this kind of first-hand experience within North Korea. That's why I think knowing more about North Korea, the situation over there, from the people who have experience in the country, who worked in the country, is very, very good experience for us to deepen our knowledge about Korea in general. So thank you, Jan. Today we have Jan Collins, and thank you, Jan, for joining us today and spending your time. I would like to just briefly introduce Jan Collins to the audience. Jan has an extensive experience of work in many countries in high-risk industries, especially in the oil and gas sector. He works with many world leading companies in this sector. He is also a coach, consultant, and trainer specializing in error and risk reduction. And more interestingly for us, he also works with Chosun Exchange, an international NGO operating in North Korea. So in other words, this NGO provides support to business people, entrepreneurs in North Korea, and provides training to them, workshops, through workshops, internships, mentorships, and so forth. So this means that Jan Collins has traveled to North Korea many times and has this first-hand experience that I mentioned. And again, thank you, Jan, for joining us. Just briefly about the format of today's seminar. Jan will talk for about 30-40 minutes. And then if you have any questions, please, you can leave your questions in the chat function below, or you can save your questions for the later, where we'll have a Q&A session at the end of this talk. And please, for those, just a reminder, turn off your audios because the background noise sometimes creates some barriers. Okay, if this is clear, Jan, the floor is yours. You have about 40 minutes roughly.
Wonderful. Thanks, Zenebek. And it's good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today. We're going to be talking about building and supporting the North Korean startup ecosystem. Something that Chosun Exchange have been doing since 2010. And I'll give you some background information about that. Just like Zenebek said, my name's Ian Collins. I was born and raised in Australia, but have lived all over the world ever since, and specializing in a science called human and organizational performance, which is all about understanding how and why people make mistakes and how we can either reduce that or mitigate the consequences of these mistakes. So have had the pleasure of working in many different countries, and it was an ad that I saw. I'm not sure how some of the social media algorithms work at times, but after having worked in places like Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and Libya and the Congo, I think the algorithms just assume that North Korea must be next on my list. So I saw an ad in about 2017 to go and teach entrepreneurship in North Korea, which really struck me as quite an odd thing, that there is entrepreneurship that actually exists in North Korea. I'd always had a fascination with the place, but always thought going there as a tourist might be a bit of a sterilized perspective. And so the opportunity to go there in 2017, really at the height of Trump and Chairman Kim's arguing with one another and calling each other names, it was quite a hot place to go at the time. But the experience just completely blew me away and really shifted some perspectives I had of North Korea, which I'd love to share with you about today. I've since been back, got heavily engaged with Chosun Exchange and have been back 4 times. And we take tours, groups of foreign business experts there to really engage with local Korean entrepreneurs and help expand their enterprise, as well as create dialogue with the West. A couple of other things, I've been guest lecturer at the European Centre for Executive Development over at the INSEAD campus in France, and was part of the Emerging Leaders Workshop or Fellowship in 2019, where we got to go to Seoul and work closely with the Ministry of Unification and the Institute of Unification Education. So who's Chosun Exchange? We're a Singapore-based non-government organisation, and we support businesses, support entrepreneurs and business-minded individuals in North Korea through workshops, through internships, mentorships, and scholarships, both inside and outside of the DPRK. And we firmly believe that entrepreneurship really provides a viable path towards change and creating a healthier civil society in North Korea, as well as opening up dialogue to the West, as well as really a unique opportunity for foreign experts to learn more about a country that is, still remains widely unknown. We've been running programs there since 2010. This is an example of one of our programs that we ran in Pyeongseong at the Science Institute there. And we really do it for a number of reasons. One, we want to enable better lives. That's sort of our core principle, and enable better lives for the Korean people by encouraging economic experimentation. We also want to create that two-way exchange and open up dialogue as much as possible, rather than these sanctions that they've been under for so long. At least open up that exchange and drive innovation in the country. There was also an opportunity, and this was certainly profound for me, was really humanizing the image of Koreans in my perspective, and cultivating that foreign expertise. It's all about responsible integration. We would love to see the DPRK really integrate into the world as a responsible global citizen, and we want to build that implementation ability. So be the #1 implementation experts of innovative ideas through operational expertise in country, and by maintaining the strongest networks in and out of Korea as well. And then lastly, we want to align sustainability with financial help and just drive strategic outcomes and sustainability by maintaining financial health through repeatable and scalable platforms as an enterprise. In terms of the context, and you may wonder how we came to be as an enterprise, how we largely have been able to go into the DPRK and teach what some principles that seem to go against their the socialist sort of norms. And if we look back to some of the early days, 2007, 2009, there was very limited interest in economic development under Kim Jong-il. And the focus was very much more on the military development and protecting the country as legitimate. One of their main goals is just to be legitimized. Then in 2009, zero currency reform paved the way for entry, and there's a gradual shift in later thinking to focus more on that economic policy. The Chosun Exchange founder Jeffrey C wrote a paper in Harvard International Review about that shift in basis for legitimacy in the DPRK. Well worth a read. But real shifts occurred when Kim Jong-un came to power, and he promised that economic development, no more belt tightening, and we certainly started to see small-scale enterprise start to expand under his leadership and guidance. There was an initial cultural openness, but this has certainly tightened up, and it's tightened up even more so during COVID, where they see almost any anyone coming into the country almost as an existential threat that they may bring the virus with them, and knowing that their healthcare system isn't brilliant, and people have spent decades of malnourishment to a large degree. So if the pandemic really hit there, it'd have a devastating effect. So the country is going back to being very closed off, and I think they'll probably be one of the last, if not the last country to really open back up again. When in 2013, we saw a lot of policy towards the special economic zones, and we saw a few of those start to develop around the country, and some agricultural reforms and enterprise reforms. And then from 2014 to sort of now, there's really been a consistent focus on developing these special economic zones. The policy around special economic zones was largely abandoned, but there's been much more consistent improvement in terms of de facto property rights. Like we mentioned now, there's a lot more tightening up of economic controls and going back to state-owned enterprise, where we had seen a much more individual enterprise opportunities. We're certainly seeing signs that it's going back towards more state-owned. From a bigger picture, how did this come to be? And largely the whole culture, many people are surprised to really learn that there is a really entrepreneurial culture in North Korea. It's largely driven by survival. And in the 90s, with what they call the arduous march, the mass famines that devastated the country, and exact figure isn't known, but upwards of a couple of million people lost their lives. Those that really relied on the public distribution system were the ones that suffered, and it was those people, and particularly the women in a largely patriarchal society, that started to just go to markets and trade whatever they could just to survive, to find food to eat. And this culture was sort of born, and it started to really pick up some momentum. And over time, these grey markets emerged, which at various times the governments either clamped down on and tried to eradicate, or under other leadership have really tried to bolster and start to bring taxation and so on to those enterprise. And so in their spirit, they're largely entrepreneurial people. And one of the big gaps, because they completely refute capitalism, any sort of education that can help them take a good concept, a good idea, and then turn it into something valuable for that local market, they really lack. And when Chosun Exchange founder Jeffrey C. went to Pyongyang as part of his MBA program in sort of the mid-2000s, one of the things that really struck him was the real thirst and the real hunger that the people he met had for things like economics textbooks or business textbooks or anything that could help them develop enterprise. And so we spent a number of years engaging with partners there, to the point where in 2010, we're actually allowed to run our first workshop. As you can imagine, it's pretty heavily scrutinized, but the program has grown and grown and grown ever since. It really is it's a critical region when we look at it from a geopolitical perspective, that they're obviously partnering with China, or being in very close proximity to China and Russia, as well as obviously South Korea and Japan. Geopolitically, it's a very important region that has largely been stuck in this conflict for since the Korean War in the 50s. We've trained now. Our program certainly grew and grew and grew until COVID hit, and we've trained close to 3,000 local North Koreans, and also brought over 100 North Koreans outside of the country to various parts of Southeast Asia, in order to try and help really build and support this entrepreneurial ecosystem and be the first generation of market-oriented startups in the country. We do this through economic policy, business, and entrepreneurship training. Before the pandemic, we were running 3 programs a year, 2 in Pyongyang and then 1 in Pyeongseong, a very important trading hub just outside of Pyongyang. And the focus is certainly more on building a more normal North Korea that sees its interests more aligned with international norms. You see, our program started really small. I think we had 18 people at the first workshop. These workshops have grown significantly, and we consistently have over 100 local Koreans attending these workshops. They come from a whole vast array of different backgrounds and associated with different, typically government organizations. But looking to, for the first time under Chairman Kim's direction, we're allowed to set up small scale enterprise and actually generate profits that they could keep for themselves. This has been met with mixed reviews inside the country, as we started to see local business people really start to generate more money than those in government sector. So it certainly had its challenges at times, but we saw a lot of so much interest in our programs. We're getting to the point where we have to run more and more. With the pandemic, we've had to switch that to a virtual delivery, which dealing with North Korea can be very challenging, as not a lot of people have access to the internet. So we've tried to pivot and find ways to really keep engaging with the country during these very challenging times, which I'll talk more about in just a little while. The people that come, the foreign business experts, we've taken over well over 120 now, and they themselves come from a whole vast array of different backgrounds. They actually pay for the opportunity in the same way that I paid. It's because we see it as such a unique opportunity to go and engage with local Koreans outside of that very heavily sanitized tourist perspective that those there going as tourists tend to see. We get to see a little bit behind the scenes and what actually happens on the ground. And I know in my own personal experience, that humanizing aspect of engaging with people, at the end of the day, for me, they're people just like you and me, who just want a better life for themselves and their family, and they're just born into a particularly unique system whereby there's a very strong class system in place, and the only way to really get ahead in that society is by showing real allegiance and loyalty to a regime, which they may or may not fully believe with, but they certainly wouldn't be telling us whether they had any particular thoughts on the regime. They're watched and listened to at all times, so they certainly wouldn't be telling us those sort of thoughts that they may have. But our volunteers, they come from different. We try to bring a bit of a cross section of different expertise. But some people, as you can imagine, it can be challenging with the perspective that North Korea has in the world of being a dangerous place. I've certainly never had any issues myself. There is an overriding sense that you're being watched quite often, but it's from the opportunity to engage with everyday people is quite unique and something that really struck home with me. So we started with 18 people at our first workshop, and we consistently get over 100 now. We did have to decrease we were running 8 to 11 programs per year for a while, but we reduced that to 3 or 4 just from a financial perspective. It's much more viable to do that. And we use some very well-known business models that are part of a number of MBA programs, Business Model Canvas, for an example. And this is all about introducing them to some concepts that they may not have considered. And entrepreneurship or business in North Korea can be tricky at the best of times. And there are things that you and I probably take for granted that are just different there. Something like advertising. How do you actually let people know about your product when there's no advertising, there's no billboards? I think there's 5 billboards in the country that are, and it's about a North Korean car brand, but that's it. The rest are more propaganda. They've manufactured, e-commerce. We're starting to see more of e-commerce and some potential opportunities to advertise there. But there are just things that you and I would largely take for granted, that it's a different operating system there. So that's another part of the unique experience for foreign business experts when they go there, just to see those unique challenges that exist in the country. Some of the programs that we've run over the years, the culture there is in North Korean society, again, it's very patriarchal, and most people are assigned either a government job or they're in the military, and people go to military for 10 years. And the only ones really exempt from either of those are married women, because in society, they're meant to be in the home and look, raising a family. And so it's really been the women in that society that have driven this culture of entrepreneurship. And they used to go to the markets and like I mentioned, they were the ones that really started to trade and have largely become the breadwinners in the family. And that's certainly been met with mixed perspectives in, again, that largely patriarchal society. But we really wanted to support those women in business because they don't get the access to tools and resources that could really help them drive that enterprise. So we ran a specific women in business workshop a few years ago, which was certainly met with a lot of praise and gratitude from those attending. Again, a bit more of a mixed reception from other places. We've run young entrepreneurs networks, provincial development programs. We developed a program called the DPRK Economic Forum, held in Pyongyang, the Grand People's Studies House, every year, where a lot of policymakers come and attend, and we help them look at partnerships with outside entities and really helping them drive policy there. The Pyeongseong Startup Festival, I'll share more about that in just a little bit. That's been a real success in the Unjong Park Special Economic Zone. And then we have the Pyongyang Urban Innovation Week, focused more on architecture. And we've certainly played a big part in helping them with their urban planning, particularly in Pyongyang and one of the other regions, Kangwon, which I'll share more about in just a little bit. Those are typically the ones that we run in the DPRK. And then we've taken people outside, North Koreans outside of the DPRK too. And a few years ago, took them to the St. Gallen Symposium in Switzerland for, again, just trying to foster and build relationships with the international community. We've run mini MBA programs, both in Singapore and Vietnam, where North Koreans have come and engaged for 5 or 6 week period and really sort of an MBA program in a very short space of time and taking them around the city and for you and I, with our ability to freely travel, going, well, particularly pre-COVID, not so much at the moment, but when we had that freedom, for someone who just doesn't have that freedom, to go to somewhere like Singapore or Vietnam is just a life-changing experience, and they take so much back with them to North Korea, and we typically start to see some of the ideas that they witnessed in other countries start to at least take form in an ideas stage. Things like payment platforms and smartphone apps, for example. One of the things that always blows me away was they've got a lot of modern technology, and what they tend to do is acquire some, whether it's a smartphone from China and reverse engineer it and then, make it a North Korean phone. And even things like apps, I was surprised to see one of the groups we're working with developing a smartphone application. And in order to get an app onto your phone in North Korea, you physically have to go to the app store. It's a brick and mortar store where you hand them your phone and they upload this onto your phone. And things like that again, you and I can hit a button and we've got this new application on our phone. There's just added layers of complexity there that make enterprise challenging, but certainly they are a very resilient and robust people, and they can certainly find ways around some of these very unique challenges. We ran the Singapore Economic Development Program and a conference we ran a few years ago called the Future Cities Summit, looking at some of the provinces in North Korea as future cities, and that ties in largely with our urban planning and land development workshop. As mentioned, this was our inaugural Women in Business workshop in Pyongyang in 2014. Again, it was very successful, and was met with a little bit of resistance internally. So, and both from a funding perspective, we stopped running that specific program, but there is certainly a need in the country to really help, specifically the women with these tools and resources that can really help them foster that entrepreneurial spirit that they really have. This is an example of the cohort that we brought to Singapore. We've run a few of these. This is a 2015 cohort. They actually participated in a 3-month intensive MBA program. And part of the intent of that is for them to go back to North Korea and then become the subject matter experts. So we don't have the availability or capacity to keep going back all the time. So almost like a train the trainer style program where they've become our local experts that have since gone back, and we've been working on this idea of a entrepreneurial incubator, particularly in the Pyeongseong region at Unjong Park. This is the Urban Innovation Week, where we get a lot of town planners and architects and the like, and really coming to the workshop to understand some of the challenges of a growing city and how they can best plan for those. This is the Unjong Park, can't remember what I called it there, the startup program that we run in Unjong Park. And Unjong Park is a very important place. There's, again, things that you and I may take for granted in terms of freedom of travel. People have to have certain access to be able to travel freely within North Korea. And so Pyeongseong became a very important trading hub just outside of the Pyongyang limits. It's about 45 minutes away from the capital, Pyongyang. And again, it's a very, very important trading post where a lot of people come and markets there. And if they don't have access to Pyongyang, they're not allowed access. As you can imagine, there's checkpoints all around the city limits. Pyeongseong is a very important place for that. They're adjoined, this Unjong Park is something we've been heavily involved with, and they're adjoined to the State Academy of Sciences in Pyeongseong. And there's been plans for about a 200 hectare facility that really is, it includes a health complex, kindergarten, schools, sports facilities, housing, and so on. But the main focus for us is on the incubator and having a place where these startups and these people can come and share ideas and really help them and help each other develop these small scale enterprise that they have. In terms of the special economic zones, we certainly saw a lot of policy directed towards them in up until a few years ago. But these special economic zones were largely set up as a neutral ground for joint learning about a globally integrated future of the two Koreas. A lot of them have come to a bit of a grinding halt in the last couple of years, but the rules were indicating that property can be leased, bought and sold within special economic zones. And we saw a lot of real estate activity taking place in those areas, and contracts typically run for 50 years. And the new rules also implied that foreigners can rent land and properties as well. That may have since changed in the last year or so under Chairman Kim, but those were certainly the rules back in 2015 when this document came out. This is just an example of, this is Unjong Park here in Pyeongseong. This is Pyeongseong, just to give you a bit what things actually look like on the ground. You can see some really nice facilities there. It's I lived in Singapore for a number of years, and Singapore is a clean city, but the North Koreans take it to another level in terms of cleanliness. Part of their sort of morning routines is being out there in the streets and making sure everything looks particularly nice, and it really does. A number of years ago, the city was very grey, and they gave it a bit of a coat of paint. So you tend to see these pastel-y greens and oranges all over the city. It's quite a colourful. Both Pyeongchang and Pyongyang are very colourful. You can see the main mode of transport there are still bikes. We've certainly seen more and more cars over the years in Pyongyang, and a lot more individual ownership of cars as well. A lot more taxis on the roads too, but most people will typically ride the bike, take the bus, or walk to wherever they have to get to. Pyeongchang district itself really shifted its policy from attracting international infrastructure investments to more supporting those local startups. And that's where we've played a big part in really trying to help them focus on the local market because of sanctions, and look at what can we develop that's going to add value to the local market. So we work with these small groups of teams and work on a concept or an idea, and how can we then turn that into something valuable for the local market. So we work on a couple of levels. At that macro level, it's more about introducing entrepreneurship to the Unjong Park Special Economic Zone Management Committee. That's where we started, and we trained them up. That was a big part of the cohort that came to Singapore for the mini MBA program. Then more on a micro level, it's all about mentoring these local startups, and we take groups of foreign business experts there. Over the years, certainly since I've been going, we typically see a lot of the same groups that have come. Some have successfully set up small enterprise and are looking to scale their businesses. Some are working on new ideas. Some have been really successful, and we've had some really great success stories, which I'll share about in just a minute. But ultimately, we wanted to get to this, and we're still on this journey of developing the incubation type program there. And then we want to plan to put domestic businesses within Unjong Park. There's a real focus on let's make this. It's all about the local markets. So we want domestic business. We want it to be local, and that's what Unjong Park can really become a standard in terms of North Korea, in terms of what's possible in developing and focusing on that enterprise at that local level. There's a few testing legal frameworks that allow individuals to keep profits. I'll just say at this point, we certainly can see a bit of a shift back more under these current restrictions that we're all in with the pandemic. But certainly there's a lot of evidence to suggest it's moving more back towards a bit more of a state-owned rather than these small-scale enterprise. But time will sort of tell as they're really hurting from this inability to trade internationally right now. But overall, we like I said, we want to establish that incubator there. So this incubator management team first came to Singapore in 2015, and we use the business model Canvas. They did that and developed 17 startups themselves, and we've seen over the years, every time we go back, we see a much significant improvement in terms of people's understanding, their education in these sort of concepts, and in terms of their presentation quality, thoughtfulness, and comprehension. And we typically will run a 4-day program with them, where for 3 days it's a mixture of us and our foreign business people that we take there, delivering lectures on certain topics. Typically topics that are covered in the business model Canvas, things like marketing and channels and manufacturing and how do you reach your customers and financing and those sort of concepts. And on the fourth day, they will typically present their ideas back to us, similar to if you've ever seen the show Shark Tank or anything like that, where they will present their concept and we will evaluate it based on our experience, and then actually award prizes for some of the best presentations and viability of concepts and so on. Just to share with you a little video of what it sort of looks like.
So design thinking is a process to create new products and services based on the needs of the users. 디자인 थिን킹이라고 기업적인 상호작용이나 그런 신화를 이용해서 사용자의需求에 기초해서 어떤 제품이나 공사를 만들기 위한 그런 과정을 작성하는 공정.
It's just a little snapshot into what it actually looks like presenting workshops there in Pyeongchang. That was at the State Academy of Science. Things like that was in November, and things like heating can be a challenge at times, and constant supply of electricity. So it's a very unique experience from a presenter perspective. Certainly, I've delivered training and workshops all over the world, and even though we obviously have to have our presentations translated into Korean, just the thirst and the hunger for information it's one of the most remarkable places that I've ever led workshops. This is just an example of some of their presentations that they will typically deliver, and just having a look at things like value propositions and which customer segments, and how are they financing, looking at revenue and profits and so on, were just concepts that they'd never, they haven't had access to before, which has really helped them and helped a couple of enterprises really be successful. These are just a couple of examples. One group developed this healthy tea, and we gave them a lot of advice on branding and packaging so that they could appeal to different customer segments, and they're doing particularly well. This guy on the right here, he developed this surge protector with that unreliable power supply at times in the DPRK. They get a lot of power outages and surges. So he developed this surge protector and was having some competition from a Chinese import, and really went to work on his branding and highlighting the Korean owned, local North Korean owned, and has become super successful. And he's come back to a couple of workshops since and presented his ideas to other teams. And that's ultimately what we want to see. A couple of ladies went off and started a very prominent coffee shop in Pyongyang, where they took the concept of loyalty cards and a few other ideas now, where people can go and purchase a espresso barista made coffee, which is very unique to Pyongyang. You can see it's in there. It's very nice. It's typically very expensive. It's probably the most expensive coffee I've ever had in my life, but that largely comes because how difficult it is to get product in. And so for local Koreans, it's a real treat to go there. But you'll certainly see it. They do quite a good business there. This was we took the Koreans to Malaysia as well to see some of the incubators there. Also took them to WeWork. WeWork, if you're not familiar, that the idea of collaborative working and collaborative spaces, just to really help them understand the concepts behind incubation and what that may look like on the ground. This was at the St. Gallen Symposium a couple of years ago now, again, just promoting that international dialogue and trying to open up dialogue as much as possible. One of the sort of models that we're looking for in terms of working with is some of these platforms that South Korea has in terms of developing enterprise. We really want to leverage these partnerships that exist already and create programs for both North and South Koreans to find a way to collaborate on ideas. We see that as a valuable pathway to helping sort of bridge that gap and heal that relationship. We presented this idea to the mayor of Seoul, who loved it, and could really see the opportunities there to collaborate with their northern partners. And this is the concept we've been working on for a while. So it's all leading up to trying to develop this network of incubator hubs and have the first real incubator in North Korea. So, and ultimately be this new generation of connected enterprises and connected as a network, Singapore, South Korea, Hong Kong, and housed in more of a vertical focused incubation. And ultimately, we really want to inspire that next generation of entrepreneurs in North Korea, and hopefully they'll get an opportunity to develop enterprise with the outside world on the international stage as well. The other one is we do a lot of work in the Gangwon province in Korea. Had a development initiative here. It's a very important place because it's a focal point for interactions outside of China, and they really want to develop this as a tourist area and link up with Wonsan and the rest of the region. Focus is on sort of the low capital industries that Koreans can participate in, and it helps to just spread development outside of Pyongyang as well. Our research efforts were intensified with this Gangwon Development Initiative and a high-level economic roadmap born out of prior existence conducted in that tourist zone. And research and roadmap was presented at the Joint World Economic Forum and Jeju Peace Forum panel last year. And we've realized that beginning on an ambitious 5-year education initiative in Gangwon at this time is pretty challenging, but our work continues to analyze the economic potential and prepare training material for future programs there. With COVID, we've been heavily impacted with our ability to travel to North Korea. And so we developed this program called the Project Changemakers. And we reached out to North Koreans abroad, and particularly students who will eventually return to the DPRK and contribute a key role in shaping their country's future. So we partnered with the EU Business School in Geneva and developed a detailed syllabi on key topics to really equip the North Koreans for their burgeoning role in international digital business. There was a heavy focus on digital. So this 6-week program, we had a few dozen North Koreans complete it worldwide, and through both live and recorded sessions, they actually got an official certification from the business school and really proved to be successful. Finding these students is probably the most challenging aspect. Many of them either in exile or very distrustful of the intent behind it. But those that were engaged certainly delivered some great feedback. In terms of our focus areas, the current US-DPRK relationship is largely stuck. There's no real effective roadmap really needed to build relationship building and trust. So for us, it's about coordinating and synchronizing efforts to build the civil society and an economy with a broader rethink on how to approach normalizing the DPRK. And one of our biggest challenges as slow progress and lack of resources certainly can result in poaching of our best people to the private sector. And we certainly struggle with funding at time and having funding pulled at various stages, critical stages. So our pivot is more on focusing on entrepreneurship more broadly outside of the DPRK, but still maintaining our efforts there. And then opening with the current restrictions, opening for new innovations in program delivery and community building, scholarships, new relationships, and this Gangwon East Coast initiative. And then lastly, just some suggestions that the US DPRK relationship certainly needs a process to rebuild trust and contact over time. It's going to be interesting to see how President Biden approaches that one. And then a focus on multiple avenues to make progress in parallel in case one of them gets stuck. The economy increasingly matters to the DPRK, and it won't get them to give up their nukes, but it's a critical area of dialogue. And then our focus is certainly on easy and quick wins and leveraging neutral platforms such as the Fulbright University in Vietnam to show, not just tell, what a new relationship could look like, and then be consistent and ensure initiatives can unfold over time and work all the channels to send a consistent message to really reset the relationship. And I think that's it from me. Certainly, I hope that has been insightful and of value to you. And certainly, once the country opens up, if you've got any interest in coming and really experiencing the DPRK in one of the most unique ways available, by all means, please get in contact.
Thank you very much, Ian, for this very, very much informative presentation. Again, there are lots of questions here. I think we can now slowly move to the Q&A session. And if there are any questions, maybe I will start from the audience, then I have a few questions as well.
Wonderful.
To ask. Yunju, do you have a question? You raised your hand or? No. Any questions?
Actually, I just clap the hands, but
okay.
I have a chance. I want to ask to Ian. Thank you for your very unique and informative presentation. Actually, it's really amazing because I don't know what's going on in terms of business with North Korea, and I was wondering normally what kind of people can participate to the program, like a seminar, workshop. How were they selected, recruited to the programs? Because probably there will be some limitation and certain, So I want to listen about those qualifications.
Yeah, it's a really great question, and it's somewhat difficult to fully grasp. And we know that the people who come to our workshops have a certain standing in society, and they're typically associated with some sort of state department. We certainly know the ones that we work with in Pyeongseong at the State Academy of Science are all related to the State Academy of Science in some way, and they have their own internal application process. So depending on their what they're working on, I'm not exactly 100% sure of the process they have to go to actually get there. We certainly see a number of same people returning and like I mentioned, wanting to sort of scale their enterprise. But in terms of their selection criteria, I'm not 100% sure. All I do know is that they've got in their society, you're either loyal, neutral, or I can't remember the exact term, not friendly to the regime, and we don't typically see those ones that aren't loyal, hostile to the regime, so to speak. So they're the ones in good standing. They call it Chongbun, I think it is. And typically come from various state operations there. The ones in Pyongyang, where we run the Urban Innovation Week, they are a lot of policymakers, a lot of architects. Again, their internal application program and how they find out about our programs, I'm not 100% sure. We work with a couple of the bodies within the country as partners that really help get the message out that this is available, and if it's something that they'd like to apply for, it's very much an application process for them. Then they go through our partners. So on any given, we've certainly turned up to present workshops and expecting 30 people, and there's 100 people in the room. So it's hard to fully gauge how and why they get there. Whilst we do often get a list of the attendees, the accuracy and legitimacy of it can be a bit questionable at times. So, yeah, I hope that answered. It's hard to really get yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Ian. And there is one question from William. William, do you want to say it or should I read it?
I just shared a question on the chat so everyone can see that. My question is more like want to hear about your own experience. So you mentioned about the international sanction implemented after the nuclear test, and that has some impact on your NGO's activities. So from your own experience, can you tell us more about the impact of international sanction in North Korea at the very ground level? Do you see any changes in the participants in your programs, or people's, who are more likely to be recruited, and some people would have not been access to this wonderful resources because of sanctions and so on?
Yeah, it's again really thought-provoking. We typically try and work with the North Koreans and those people who have been identified in terms of sanctions. We sort of request that they're not in attendance at the workshops, because that would get us into trouble. Now, whether we can actually prove that, or they can prove that to us, we're never 100% sure. So, but in terms of the sanctions impact on the people that come, the North Koreans even though the sanctions increased, we still started to see more and more cars. We started to see luxury good shops open in Pyongyang, and they find ways around sanctions typically. They have a lot of ingenuity, and it may just simply be a case where one company has been identified as part of sanctions, as can no longer do business. It'll very soon open up again under a different name, and so there's certainly been ways that they've found ways around sanctions. So for me, it doesn't seem like it's only going to agitate them more and more, and is only going to lead more and more to this wanting to be legitimized on the world stage, and that's by developing their nuclear program. So whilst we certainly don't advocate and say get rid of sanctions, I think just increasing more and more sanctions is not the viable pathway forward. But in terms of the people that we've seen, even with sanctions increase, we've seen more and more people come to the workshop. So it hasn't had an impact in that way.
Thank you. That's very, very interesting to hear about. Okay.
Welcome.
I even remember you mentioned last time that you once stuck in a traffic jam in Pyongyang.
Yeah.
So that's how different. So I have a few questions, if I may. I mean, the first one is related to what you do in Chosun Exchange in North Korea. My question is about the sectors that your trainees come from mostly. Which sector do they come from, and what kind of products, or what kind of business they, in most cases, do, and do they produce any goods? If yes, do they go to export the products, or is that for internal consumption only? This kind of question. And the second is, are there any restrictions for trainers, for volunteers who go to North Korea? I guess not everyone can just join Chosun Exchange and travel to North Korea. Is there any kind of restrictions and the rules? And the third is more about the personal, sorry for many questions. The third is more about the personal experience, your personal experience. You showed us beautiful photos from Pyongyang, right? With this new fancy buildings. And we have in the post-Soviet region a saying or kind of phrase, which is Pachomkin village. Maybe you're aware of this.
Yeah.
So this is a beautiful facade, but beyond that facade, everything is kind of managed to. Do you think that you've noticed some kind of real improvements from your first visit to Pyongyang and from your last visit? Is there any kind of real improvement for the people living there behind those beautiful buildings?
Yeah, some really great questions. I'll start with the the people that we take to the country, and largely because that's a large part of what I do with Chosen Exchanges as a workshop coordinator. We have to do a lot of vetting, so it adds some complexity because North Korea is atheist. They don't believe in gods as such, other than the Kim family are the gods there. So anyone going there promoting religion of any kind is strictly forbidden. We also get a number of journalists who want to come in, and journalists are obviously forbidden as well. And so there's a lot of research that certainly myself and the team do into the people that are coming to and applying to be part of our program. It's so, and the fact that they have to, people pay for this opportunity as well, and it's a couple of grand to come and actually, which includes flights and transport. I mean, everything is included in that, other than gifts and alcohol, and alcohol is pretty cheap there. They've got an amazing beer, by the way, one of the best beers I've ever had in my life. So people willing to pay to come to what many consider to be a really dangerous country, and things like Otto Warmbier, getting killed, well, not killed, but dying soon after he went back to the US, certainly hurts people's willingness to go and jump on a plane and pay money for that opportunity to do so. So largely the people that come on our programs are driven by the opportunity to make a difference and to see the country in such a unique way. But there's a lot of work that we go into vetting to make sure that we don't upset our partners or the Koreans. So it's certainly no one that has any sort of agenda from a religious, or they're going to write a story about it. Now we're pretty freely allowed to take photos and video and just not of certain structures and construction particularly, or of military, which can be challenging at times because there's military personnel sort of everywhere. But as long as we abide by that, we're okay. In terms of the actual what they're producing, we've seen a number of things like the coffee shop and developing tea. We see a lot of work around energy, and particularly renewable energy, and that largely comes from the unreliable infrastructure there. And something unique that I certainly witnessed in North Korea is that in most countries, the penthouse, the room on the top of a building is typically your most sought after. But in North Korea, it's the other way around. The ground floor is typically the most sought after because the elevator would lose power, and when you're in the elevator, and you don't want to walk 40 flights of stairs, and just things like that are so unique to the country. What was the third part, Denebek?
That was the real improvement for the people.
Oh, the improvement, yeah. So one of the most notable things that I observed. So I went at 2017, where Trump was calling Chairman Kim a rocket man and so on and so forth. So the streets, and there was so much anti-US propaganda everywhere, and some pretty stark and confronting sort of images. And the next time I went back, things were starting to pave the way for the first summit that they had in Singapore, and all of that anti-US stuff was just gone. It just disappeared. You couldn't even buy. I was thankful I actually bought some posters at the time, but you couldn't even find any of those posters anywhere. We're certainly seeing more and more people have smartphones. They're dressing better. There's more cars. There's more taxis, and like I said, there's luxury goods stores opening, which is a real indication that this business sector was starting to develop. Now we also know that you don't want to get too big in that country because bad things can happen, as we saw with his uncle. So there's this sort of fine balance there. But the indications certainly were that things were improving for the people. But I feel like these latest, with the pandemic, we're going to go sort of a few steps backwards as restrictions are really hurting the economy there.
Many thanks. Any other questions? I think we have one question from Huyun in the chat. So Huyun is again asking, when you train North Koreans, what is the biggest challenges or issue that you face, given that most of them are not familiar with the capitalism and market economy?
Yeah, it's good. One of the initial challenges that they face is there's not taxation built into their system. So to set up an enterprise, they largely have to pay this flat tax, which prevents a lot of the smaller scale enterprise really getting off the ground. So that's a huge inhibitor straight away, which is why they will typically then partner with a state-owned, one of the state-owned enterprises, just to get that initial funding to really just start developing something. So that's typically one of the biggest challenges. As I mentioned, marketing is a massive challenge there, where there's a real, when you and I have so many opportunities to market goods and services, but there just isn't that there. So it's typically been a word of mouth, process for many, many years, or just who you could influence locally. We are starting to see, like e-commerce is starting to really develop there, and opportunities to advertise on their e-commerce platforms. But marketing is probably one of the biggest challenges that I've seen there. And also getting, goods and services with all the sanctions in place to develop something, whether it's the raw materials, obviously that's a big challenge for them as well. The other thing is intellectual property. There's no intellectual property laws there, so someone could come up with a good idea, and if there's not a lot they can do to protect that, which is a real challenge.
Yeah, related to marketing and this, property rights. I remember one of the speakers during our fellowship program in Seoul was saying that the choco pies, the biscuits, became very popular in North Korea some years ago. And one of this local, businesses in North Korea started producing the same kind of product, but with the same design, but with different tastes. So that's maybe one of the examples of how intellectual property rights are violated. Any other questions?
I just ask a quick question about internet supplies in Pyongyang and Gyeongsong. You said that more and more people start using mobile phone there, and are the phones connected to the internet or just to calling and answering the phone? And were you able to use the internet while you are staying in Pyongyang?
Yeah. So most people will not have access to the internet, the World Wide Web, but unless you're a government body or a scientist needing to do research, so unless you're high up in the government, most people just don't have access to the internet. What they do have access to is a state-run intranet, so that only operates within the country, and it's all state-owned websites. So you can imagine they're promoting an agenda on there. The access to information is pretty limited. Again, something that you and I take for granted, that is just not available there. What a lot of them do will get smuggled SIM cards in from China that they can typically use close to the border. very dangerous to do so, but a lot of them will do that or pay people to send messages to family members outside. We do get a SIM card there, mainly for emergencies, just so we're available to be contacted if if someone gets sick. One of the people we've taken, it's more of a duty of care thing. But to give you an example, it costs about $200 US for 100 megabytes of data. I mean, it's astronomically expensive. So we're not sitting there surfing into Instagram every night. I can tell you that.
Okay, interesting. So I think we can take one more last question if there is any. Marilyn, I think you're.
I want to apologize. I had a class commitment and I missed most of it, but I will watch your recording, and thank you for being here. I love the parts that I heard, but I'll watch the recording to catch all of it. Thank you.
Appreciate it. You're welcome.
Okay, then I think we can wrap up this comment. Unfortunately, we didn't have many participants today for some reason, but definitely we'll share the recording with the students, with the NU community, I think, and we hope that many people will watch this online. And thank you, Ian, again for your time, for your interesting, informative presentation. And we'll be in touch. And if you're visiting Kazakhstan, we'll be very glad to welcome you at Nazarbayev University and meet personally again.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And it's been a real pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity to come and speak with you today, and wishing you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.